When the HOA declared my 20-foot fishing boat an eyesore that breached community standards, I never imagined I would soon possess the entire marina they utilized for their yacht club. That sharp metallic sound you can hear is me securing the gate to what was once their exclusive marina, effectively imprisoning every last one of their luxurious yachts behind a chain-link fence as they shout in the background. The very same HOA board members who attempted to fine me into oblivion over my completely lawful fishing boat are now receiving a costly education on the principles of property rights. The scent of salt air mingling with diesel exhaust and the sound of gravel shifting beneath my boots is considerably more satisfying when you hold every advantage and their multi-million-dollar vessels are stranded until they acquire some civility. Let me rewind and explain how this whole situation began. My name is Jake Thornfield. I'm 45 years old, a retired Coast Guard mechanic who simply desired a peaceful fishing life after a divorce that stripped me of everything but my mental fortitude. Upon inheriting my uncle's waterfront property in Millbrook Shores, Florida, I believed I had won the lottery. It offered a stunning sunrise vista, a personal dock, and my most cherished possession, a 1987 Boston whaler named the Rusty Anchor. While she isn't likely to win any aesthetic awards, that boat hums like a contented cat and has seen me through more gales than I can remember. Millbrook Shores initially appeared flawless, a community of 200 waterfront residences with tranquil streets, the type of location where your primary concern should be if the fish are biting. The mix of salty air and morning coffee on my dock was the retirement I felt I had earned after 2 decades of servicing Coast Guard cutters in all conceivable weather conditions. Then I encountered Priscilla Weatherford. Imagine the most dreadful HOA president conceivable, 52 years old, holding power for 8 years, and driving a white BMW more polished than most people's wedding bands. She works as a real estate agent, which clarifies her fixation on property values and her knack for making others feel worthless. The woman appeared at my dock one morning, clad in designer sunglasses and holding a clipboard as if she were surveying a crime scene. I should have recognized then that my peace was about to be disturbed. 3 months into my supposed paradise, the wake-up call arrived in the form of a certified letter that felt like a direct insult. It was a violation notice for an unsightly marine vessel. My flawlessly legal, well-kept fishing boat was apparently an offense to their aesthetic criteria. I was given 30 days to get rid of it or incur daily fines of $200. To be perfectly clear, my boat was tidier than the majority of people's kitchens and was correctly registered with the state, but it seemingly didn't project the wealthy yacht owner image loudly enough for Princess Priscilla. I assumed this had to be a simple misunderstanding, so I took the rational course of action. I attended the subsequent HOA meeting to clarify the matter like a reasonable adult. That was a huge error. The community center reeked of stale coffee and resignation. The metal folding chairs groaned with every nervous adjustment, and the flickering fluorescent lighting cast a glow that made everyone appear as though they were under interrogation by the IRS. Priscilla presided over the head of the table as if she were leading a Fortune 500 board meeting rather than a simple neighborhood grievance session. When I calmly noted that my boat was entirely within legal bounds, she offered a smile of the kind real estate agents perfect in front of a mirror. "Mr. Thornfield," she stated, tapping her crimson fingernails on the clipboard, "we have community standards to uphold. It's possible you might feel more at ease in a neighborhood better aligned with your lifestyle." The emphasis she placed on lifestyle communicated everything I needed to understand. The issue wasn't the boat. It was that I drove a pickup truck instead of a high-end sedan, worked with my hands rather than selling inflated real estate, and didn't conform to her idealized image of a Millbrook Shores resident. She was attempting to force me out simply because I didn't match her perception of the right kind of neighbor. Observing the room was like witnessing a hostage crisis. Every resident present avoided making eye contact, seemingly afraid to even breathe too loudly lest they become her subsequent target. These individuals were living under the thumb of this woman and her exercises in power. It was then I understood that I was not her first target. She had likely been intimidating people out of this community for a long time. Well, she had just initiated a conflict with the wrong individual. 20 years in the Coast Guard prepares you to navigate storms, and Priscilla Weatherford was on the verge of discovering that some people are not easily frightened. I didn't yet grasp the magnitude of her mistake, but I was certainly going to relish discovering it. Priscilla wasted no time in demonstrating the kind of person I was up against. When I failed to meet her absurd 30-day deadline, because I was occupied researching the legality of her demands, she intensified the pressure like a drill sergeant on a particularly bad day. The daily fine escalated from $200 to $500, and I was suddenly facing substantial financial penalties just for docking my own boat at my own property. But that was merely her initial gambit. Within a week, any person visiting my residence received a parking citation. My neighbor borrowed my hedge trimmer and got a parking violation. The pizza delivery driver lingered 5 minutes too long, resulting in another citation. She was monitoring my property as if it were a high-value target, likely watching through her designer sunglasses with a stopwatch and a vendetta. The woman had elevated harassment to a fine art. Then she revealed her true nature. Priscilla lodged a complaint with the county, alleging that I was conducting a commercial fishing business from my residential property. This was complete fabrication, but it led to county inspectors appearing at my doorstep, inquiring about business licenses I didn't need for a hobby I wasn't monetizing. She was trying to suffocate me with bureaucratic obstacles, banking on me giving up and relocating rather than confronting her army of minor infractions. The scent of diesel and salt water from my morning boat work became my sanctuary as I navigated this madness. However, this is where Priscilla made her first significant error. She misjudged what 2 decades of military administrative work teaches a person about navigating bureaucracy. While she was playing the role of a petty dictator, I was conducting research, genuine research. I dedicated every evening to the county courthouse basement, sifting through property records that smelled of old paper and failed aspirations. The fluorescent lights buzzed like agitated wasps as I photocopied deed after deed, assembling a complete picture of what I had inherited from my uncle. That's when I unearthed the first glimmer of hope buried within all the legal jargon. My uncle's property encompassed more than just the house and dock. It included something called riparian rights, essentially a legal right to access the waterways that could not be revoked by any HOA or local association. I recalled my uncle frequently telling me as a child, "Jake, when you purchase waterfront property, always insist on a title search. You might own more than you realize." At the time, I dismissed it as paranoia, but now I saw that he was safeguarding something precious. These rights predated Priscilla's entire tyrannical rule, originating when the area was initially developed in the 1960s. Even more valuable was an archaic easement agreement that granted my property unique privileges at the marina. Riparian rights, I discovered, are akin to holding a permanent get-out-of-jail-free card for water access. Once established, they are tied to the property indefinitely unless explicitly signed away. And my uncle, bless his cautious soul, never relinquished anything. As I compiled my legal arsenal, I began to form some valuable friendships in the neighborhood. Mrs. Bennett, the 78-year-old woman next door, had been observing Priscilla's antics with the type of quiet fury that can only be forged from decades of dealing with bullies. It emerged that she had been meticulously documenting the HOA's misconduct for years, awaiting someone courageous enough to challenge her. "That woman has been oppressing this neighborhood since her election," Mrs. Bennett informed me over coffee, her voice sharp enough to shatter glass. "She forced out the Martinez family 2 years ago with false noise complaints. The Johnsons departed after she asserted their vegetable garden breached landscaping rules. You are not her first victim, but perhaps you can be her last." The sound of pelicans diving for fish outside my window became the background music for my research. Each splash was a reminder of why I had moved here, for tranquility, quiet, and the simple satisfaction of being left undisturbed. But Priscilla was about to find out that sometimes the quietest individuals are the most formidable when provoked. I also began to document every event with the meticulousness the Coast Guard had instilled in me over 2 decades. Every phone conversation was recorded, a practice I had learned was perfectly legal in Florida from a prior property dispute. Every interaction was photographed. Every violation notice was cataloged with timestamps and witness accounts. If Priscilla wanted to engage in a paperwork battle, I would demonstrate what proper documentation entailed. By the conclusion of the first month, I had accumulated a pile of evidence substantial enough to overwhelm anyone and a growing awareness that this conflict extended beyond just my boat. Priscilla had been using HOA regulations as weapons for years, and I was in possession of property rights she was completely unaware of. The only question was how far I was prepared to push this confrontation. In retrospect, I should have realized that the unassuming man tending to his boat at dawn would become the storm she never anticipated. Priscilla must have detected that she was losing her grip, because her following action was straight from a dictator's manual. She convened an emergency HOA meeting to pass new marina access rules, asserting that my boat posed a safety risk to yacht club members. The woman actually stood there, maintaining a serious expression, and claimed my 20-foot fishing boat was a greater danger than the floating mansions that half the yacht owners struggled to dock without damaging every piling. The meeting was a complete spectacle. Priscilla brandished newly printed liability reports while issuing warnings about insurance catastrophes, her voice laden with feigned concern for the community's welfare. Then she delivered her true blow, rescinding my parking rights for my boat trailer, labeling it an unauthorized commercial vehicle despite it being legally parked in my own driveway. But that wasn't sufficient for Princess Priscilla. Within a matter of days, murmurs began to shadow me wherever I went. The cashier at the grocery store gave me peculiar glances, and the attendant at the gas station inquired if I was all right. I was suddenly being cast as the neighborhood's unstable veteran who was failing to cope with civilian life. She was tainting the social atmosphere, attempting to isolate me while legally cornering me. While Priscilla was disseminating her venom, I was gathering my own. I started attending county commissioner meetings, where I learned some fascinating things during the public comment sessions. It turned out that multiple residents had been lodging complaints about the marina for months, citing noise violations, environmental concerns, and yacht owners discharging wastewater and operating engines at all hours. Her esteemed yacht club was not the exemplary operation she portrayed it to be. Consequently, I took on the role of the neighborhood's unofficial environmental watchdog. Each morning, with my coffee in hand, I documented violations from my dock. The sharp scent of spilled diesel became my morning signal as I photographed fuel sheens, recorded noise infractions, and observed boats anchored improperly in no-wake zones. If Priscilla wanted to use safety as a pretext, I would show her what genuine safety breaches looked like. That was when Dr. Sarah Martinez from the Environmental Protection Group appeared at my doorstep. She had heard about my predicament and arrived armed with charts that resembled evidence for a criminal proceeding. "We've been tracking water quality problems downstream from that marina for 2 years," she explained, laying out contamination reports on my kitchen table. If someone could grant us access to monitor the direct source. The unspoken possibility lingered in the air like the morning mist. While constructing my environmental argument, I uncovered something that would have made my uncle immensely proud. Concealed within his correspondence from the 1990s were letters indicating that the marina had once been designated for public access. The HOA had incrementally privatized it through legal tactics that seemed dubious at best and potentially fraudulent. My uncle had opposed this privatization at every turn, preserving copies of the original public access agreements and environmental impact assessments. Reviewing his detailed notes felt like receiving strategic plans from the afterlife. Every letter, every legal document, every environmental issue he had raised was still there, ready to be utilized. The old man had prepared a legal fortress for me, and I was just now discovering its contents. I recalled a Coast Guard lawyer once telling me that professional licenses are a potent form of leverage against individuals who depend on their reputation. Acting on this advice, I submitted an ethics complaint against Priscilla's real estate license, detailing her pattern of harassment and possible discrimination. State licensing boards are not to be trifled with when there is a documented history of authority abuse. My late-night sessions at the law library became a regular practice, the musty scent of old legal volumes mixing with excessive coffee as I meticulously traced property lines with a surveyor's accuracy. Each document I duplicated was another piece of my arsenal. Every boundary line I confirmed was another fissure in Priscilla's carefully constructed facade. The most brilliant aspect was observing her confidence erode without her grasping the reason. She could perceive that I was building a case and feel the pressure intensify, but she had no clue about the depth of my uncle's foresight. Environmental advocates were now posing questions about the marina. State authorities were investigating her professional conduct. County officials were receiving grievances about yacht club infractions. By the second month, Priscilla was contending with crises on several fronts, while I was still readying my most formidable weapons. She believed she was contending with some disgruntled veteran who would eventually concede and leave. What she was unaware of was that my uncle had devoted 30 years to preparing for this very kind of confrontation, and he had bequeathed me everything necessary to complete what he had initiated. The sound of yacht engines laboring to start in polluted water was becoming my preferred morning ambience, because soon enough, those engines wouldn't be starting at all. By the third month, Priscilla was growing frantic, and frantic individuals make foolish errors. She engaged a private investigator to find some compromising information on me. Evidently, 20 years of distinguished military service were not sufficient to assuage her suspicion. The investigator was as conspicuous as a lit-up sign, parked in his dilapidated sedan, snapping photos as if he were engaged in a clandestine surveillance mission. I made a point to wave at him each morning as I inspected my boat, just to signal that I was untroubled by whatever he might uncover. Then she took an action that revealed her true character. Priscilla arranged to have my boat towed one Tuesday morning, asserting it was abandoned property because I hadn't relocated it in 48 hours, despite it being lawfully moored at my private pier. She had manipulated an obscure county regulation to serve her own purposes. It cost me $300 and a full day of navigating paperwork that smelled of bureaucratic retaliation to retrieve the rusty anchor. Her most malicious tactic was a form of economic assault. Priscilla began to exert pressure on local businesses to refuse me service, claiming I was detrimental to the community's image. The fuel dock at the marina suddenly experienced pump malfunctions whenever I approached. The marine supply shop encountered inexplicable inventory issues when I required parts. She was systematically attempting to make my existence unbearable, hoping I would succumb to the pressure and simply go away. While Princess Priscilla was engrossed in these insignificant schemes, I was on the verge of discovering the ultimate weapon my uncle had left for me. Tucked away in a safety deposit box were underwater property surveys from the 1960s, which demonstrated that I owned not only the waterfront lot, but also 2 additional submerged parcels that governed access to the entire marina. The marina company had been remitting rent to the HOA for 15 years, but to the incorrect party. Reviewing those surveys felt akin to discovering a hidden treasure. These underwater lots were situated like a strategic choke point at the marina's entrance. I recalled my uncle's constant assertion that in coastal regions, water access rights are often more valuable than the land itself, and the one who controls that access holds all the power. Now I grasped why he had fought so relentlessly to keep these parcels from falling into the HOA's hands. The legal ramifications struck me with the force of a tidal wave. Every yacht club lease was founded on a precarious base. Every marina fee Priscilla's HOA had amassed was potentially illegitimate. Environmental permits would require a complete resubmission under the proper ownership. I was in possession of documents that could dismantle 15 years of her meticulously built domain. My uncle's journals served as my tactical guide that weekend. He had recorded every pressure tactic, every attempt to oust him, and every legal maneuver they had employed against neighbors who did not conform to their ideal. His last entry, penned months before his passing, read like a premonition. If they target you as they did me, remember that the most valuable rights are often the ones they fail to seize. Mrs. Bennet evolved from a quiet neighbor into a trove of intelligence, disclosing that disillusioned residents had been covertly documenting the HOA's misconduct for years. "We have been awaiting someone with the fortitude to resist," she remarked, handing me a folder so thick with violation notices, instances of discriminatory enforcement, and financial discrepancies that it could have stopped a bullet. "That woman has been draining this community while enriching herself." Dr. Martinez's environmental analysis was escalating into Priscilla's greatest fear. Water contamination levels were nearing the threshold for EPA action, and I possessed documentation of numerous unreported fuel spills and waste infractions by the yacht club. What had begun as HOA harassment was transforming into potential federal criminal offenses. During my morning coffee ritual, observing the sunrise illuminate the water that was slicked with oil from heedless yacht owners, I understood that Priscilla had been engaged in a conflict she had already lost. My uncle had constructed the ultimate legal stronghold, and I was finally prepared to deploy it. The beauty of underwater property rights is that most people are unaware of their existence. Marina operators, yacht club members, and even HOA tyrants can operate for decades under the illusion that they control water access, never suspecting that another party holds the actual keys to their domain. It is like believing you own a building when someone else owns the only road leading to it. I made the telephone call that would alter the course of everything. Marina Management, this is Jake Thornfield. We must discuss your lease agreements at once. It appears you have been paying rent to individuals who do not, in fact, own the property you are leasing. The profound silence on the other end of the line was all the confirmation I needed. That afternoon, I strolled down to my dock and observed million-dollar yachts bobbing placidly in waters they believed they governed. The irony was exquisite. All those luxurious boats were about to become very pricey yard decor, and their owners were oblivious to the fact that the trap had already been sprung. Priscilla's empire was founded on usurped land, and the rightful owner was finally prepared to take possession. The stale air of that bank vault will be etched in my memory forever. As it was there, I found the ultimate weapon my uncle had bequeathed to me. Laid out on the cold metal surface were not just property deeds. They were the keys to Priscilla's entire domain. There were 3 distinct parcels: the waterfront house everyone was aware of, and 2 submerged sections that created a perfect bottleneck at the marina's entrance. My hands trembled as I read the handwritten message. Jake, if you are reading this, they likely used the same tactics on you as they did on me. Here is how you prevail. The underwater surveys struck me with the force of a physical blow. For 15 years, the Marina Management Company had been making rent payments to the HOA for property they never legally possessed. It was comparable to finding out that someone had been collecting rent on your home while you were stationed abroad. My uncle had deliberately kept these parcels out of the HOA's control to prevent precisely the situation Priscilla was creating for me. However, the most explosive revelation was concealed in the original 1960s development contract. The marina's current private designation was based on a complete legal fabrication. The initial agreement mandated perpetual public water access, not exclusively for yacht club members, but for the entire community. The HOA had usurped this access through clandestine agreements that would make a seasoned lawyer blush. Every exclusive contract, every yacht club benefit, and every dollar they had collected was founded on deceit. Reading my uncle's journals was like uncovering a combat log. He had fought these same conflicts for 30 years, recording every pressure campaign, every neighbor they had forced out, and every regulation they had manipulated to assert more dominance. The final entry was deeply moving. I retained these rights to safeguard future generations from the same persecution. Do not allow them to take what is rightfully the community's. The environmental aspect was even more damning. All marina permits had been granted based on fraudulent ownership declarations. 15 years of yacht club activities had been carried out under invalid environmental clearances. Dr. Martinez's contamination findings suddenly transformed from simple neighborhood grievances into evidence for a federal criminal investigation. Sitting in that vault, with the fluorescent lights humming above, I fully comprehended the magnitude of what I had inherited. This was not merely property, it was justice awaiting execution. Every yacht moored at that marina was technically trespassing on my land. Every fee the yacht club had remitted was rent money misappropriated from the legitimate owner. Every exclusive benefit they had enjoyed was built upon stolen community assets. The shift in power was so absolute it was disorienting. Priscilla believed she was intimidating some ordinary veteran with a boat issue. In reality, she had picked a fight with the man who owned the very ground she stood on. I had the power to shut down the entire marina the next day, claim 15 years of overdue rent, or mandate a complete environmental cleanup at the yacht club's expense. But my uncle's final lesson was the most crucial. Property rights are like icebergs. Most people only see the part above the water. The true power is always concealed below. Use it to defend the community, not just yourself. The taste of stale bank air, combined with the sweet anticipation of impending justice, filled my senses as I meticulously gathered the documents. Priscilla had spent months attempting to oust me with petty intimidation and unlawful fees. Now, I was about to demonstrate what genuine power looked like. As I left the bank, I felt my uncle's presence as if he were right beside me. He had spent 3 decades constructing the perfect legal defense. And now it was time to see what would happen when an irresistible force met an immovable HOA president. The conflict was nearing its end, and Priscilla was completely unaware that she had already been defeated. It was time to convene my war council and strategize the final assault. My first call was to David Bennett, Mrs. Bennett's nephew, a maritime lawyer who was practically ecstatic when I detailed the situation. 15 years of fraudulent marina leases with environmental violations? Jake, this is the type of case that brings tears of joy to law school professors, he said. And given what they did to my aunt, I'll handle it pro bono for the sheer pleasure of seeing them brought down. David involved his partner, Sarah Kim, an environmental attorney who had been seeking exactly this kind of corruption case. Within hours, my kitchen table resembled the command center for a major military operation, with legal documents scattered everywhere, property surveys layered over environmental reports, and enough coffee cups to keep a submarine crew alert for a week. The scent of new legal papers blended with increasingly potent coffee became our rallying cry. Mrs. Bennett then delivered her most significant piece of intelligence yet. Jake, allow me to introduce the silent witnesses. It turned out that nearly half the neighborhood had been covertly documenting Priscilla's tyrannical rule for years. Every unjust violation, every instance of selective enforcement, and every dollar that had vanished from the community's funds. We've been maintaining records like the IRS building a case against Al Capone, she stated, presenting manila folders thick enough to deflect a projectile. These individuals had been compiling a criminal case without even knowing it. Our legal approach was both elegant and severe. Step 1. Inform Marina management that their lease was null and void, as they had been paying rent to property imposters. Step 2. Issue cease and desist orders for all yacht club activities until valid environmental permits could be secured. Step 3. Demand a full financial audit of every misappropriated dollar from 15 years of illicit operations. I had learned in the Coast Guard that when contesting invalid commercial agreements, you strike with full force before the opposition can organize a defense. Rebecca Torres from the county newspaper appeared at my door as if a holiday had arrived early. I've been looking into HOA corruption for 2 years, she remarked, her eyes widening as I presented the evidence. This story could compel the state legislature to finally reform HOA oversight. The financial implications were immense. David's investigation revealed that marina revenues surpassed $200,000 per year, totaling over $3 million in embezzled community funds over 15 years. However, instead of bankrupting everyone with demands for back rent, we devised a more refined solution: fair lease agreements that would finance genuine community enhancements rather than subsidizing the yacht club. While the lawyers drafted the necessary documents, I managed the physical arrangements. Security cameras were installed around my property, partially for security and partially because I wanted to capture Priscilla's expression when she faced the truth. The sounds of workers upgrading my dock mingled with the hum of marine fencing being delivered as we prepared for a powerful visual statement. Dr. Martinez liaised with federal authorities while examining water samples that looked like evidence from a major incident. Environmental regulations don't care about local politics, she noted, indicating contamination levels that would prompt EPA investigators to act immediately. Pollution is pollution, and someone is always held accountable for the cleanup, ideally the ones who created the mess. The psychological aspect was my favorite part. Clandestine meetings with Priscilla's other victims exposed the full extent of the harm she had caused. The Martinez family was driven out by noise complaints that were merely children playing. The elderly Johnsons were harassed with daily inspections until they sold their home and moved into an assisted living facility. Young couples were forced away by discriminatory enforcement that consistently targeted anyone not driving a luxury vehicle. But the most damning information emerged from the community's financial records. Priscilla hadn't just been collecting fraudulent marina fees. She had been embezzling community funds to support yacht club activities. Pool maintenance was reduced, playground equipment remained broken for months, and community gatherings were canceled to cover yacht club insurance costs. She had been stealing from every resident to favor her affluent friends, all while citing budget limitations. Timing was critical. David orchestrated simultaneous legal filings intended to land like a synchronized assault. Notifications of invalid leases, reports of environmental violations, federal complaints, and cease and desist orders, all delivered at the same moment. In maritime property law, he explained while arranging the legal barrage, you don't give them a chance to strategize, only a chance to capitulate. The beautiful irony was that I was planning for alternative community access while orchestrating Priscilla's ruin. Once we regained control, public boat ramp access would be promptly reinstated, equitable fee systems would be put in place, and a legitimate community fund would be established for waterfront projects. My uncle's dream of a community-managed marina was finally materializing. That last evening before the plan was set in motion, sitting on my dock and watching the sunset cast a golden hue on the water as yacht owners savored their final night of unearned privileges, I felt 15 years of community injustice begin to dissipate. The diesel fumes and the gentle sound of waves against expensive boats sounded like a requiem for corruption. Tomorrow, Priscilla Weatherford would find out that some people don't stay down when you try to knock them out. Priscilla could sense her domain was collapsing, as her subsequent actions reeked of sheer desperation. She convened an emergency HOA meeting to permanently prohibit me from all common areas, asserting that I represented a clear and present danger to the community's safety. The woman actually stood there with a straight face, proclaiming my fishing boat a terrorist menace to their yacht club. The metallic scrape of folding chairs and the nervous coughs from intimidated residents conveyed everything. Even her staunchest allies knew she had lost her grasp on reality. Her most significant error was engaging Thompson and Associates, the most expensive law firm in the county, to contest my property assertions. She had persuaded them that I was some delusional individual attempting to seize marina access with counterfeit documents. The irony was palpable. She was squandering HOA funds on a battle she had already lost, using money that was, by rights, mine. Then Priscilla plunged headfirst into a smear campaign. She began spreading rumors to anyone who would listen that I suffered from PTSD and was potentially dangerous. She even contacted the VA mental health hotline, feigning concern as a neighbor, in an attempt to have me involuntarily hospitalized. The desperation in her voice was so palpable you could almost taste it, like diesel fumes on a warm day. While Princess Priscilla was busy demolishing her own credibility, I was overseeing the most satisfying construction project of my career. Under the benign pretense of property improvements, I started erecting what I euphemistically termed a privacy fence along my water access points. It was perfectly legal on my own property, but its placement was so precise that it created a bottleneck, trapping every yacht in the marina like prized fish in a high-end net. The fence was erected post by post over 3 magnificent days. Each section was driven into the ground with the gratifying cadence of approaching justice. By Wednesday morning, the main boat channel was secured more tightly than a bank safe, adorned with chain link and private property, no trespassing signs that shone like jewels in the morning light. The marina had been transformed into a very costly parking area, and I possessed the sole key to their release. Thursday morning's panic at the yacht club was more enjoyable than any holiday. Engines revved in vain, boat horns blared like maritime distress signals, and voices escalated with a level of hysteria typically associated with natural calamities. The sharp smell of burning diesel blended with the sweet scent of affluent individuals' distress as they realized their million-dollar playthings had become little more than oversized pool floats. Priscilla's phone was ringing incessantly before 7 a.m., with yacht owners demanding action, threatening legal action, and generally having meltdowns like children whose toys had been taken away. She frantically contacted county officials to have my fence ruled illegal, but you cannot be in violation of property laws when you are building on land you rightfully own. The sound of her increasingly high-pitched voice carrying across the water became my new morning alarm. The legal maneuvering devolved into a farce. Priscilla's high-priced attorneys found that my property claims were not only legitimate, but were legally indisputable. Marina management ceased paying rent to the HOA and began pleading for direct talks with me. The yacht club's legal threats vanished as their lawyers understood they had no legal basis to demand access over private land they had never possessed. Rebecca Torres's newspaper article, Marina Wars, When Yacht Club Privilege Meets Property Rights, was a bombshell. The online commentary turned into a war zone between incensed yacht owners claiming unfair treatment and ordinary residents celebrating that someone was finally resisting HOA overreach. The Marina meltdown became a local trend as individuals shared their own experiences with HOA harassment. The most gratifying aspect was observing Priscilla's power base disintegrate like a sandcastle in a storm. Board members who had blindly approved her decisions suddenly claimed ignorance of their participation. Neighbors who had remained silent for years began to publicly share their own negative experiences. Even her husband, Bruce, started making elaborate excuses to avoid being seen with her in public. The pressure was visibly consuming her. Priscilla's impeccable facade began to show signs of wear. Her hair was slightly out of place, her makeup smudged from constant phone calls. That immaculate white BMW looked as if she had been holding crisis meetings from the driver's seat. Mrs. Bennett mentioned seeing her pacing her driveway at 2 a.m., her phone pressed to her ear as if she were managing a wartime situation. County officials were caught in a bureaucratic bind. They could not compel me to dismantle legal structures on my own property, yet affluent yacht owners were pressuring them for a resolution. The entire affair had become a legal conundrum, and I held all the necessary pieces to solve it. All the while, I kept up my friendly neighbor persona, cheerfully waving at the stranded yacht owners and offering useful advice about crane services for land-based boat transport. The chorus of frustrated marine engines seeking non-existent exits became my morning entertainment, particularly when accompanied by Priscilla's increasingly frantic damage control calls. She still thought this was merely about a fence and some boats. The poor woman had no clue the real storm was still gathering force offshore. With her yacht club members held captive by my fence, Priscilla's desperation escalated to extreme levels. She attempted to have my fence classified as an unlawful structure, alleging it violated non-existent setback rules. When that proved fruitless, she arranged what she termed community emergency meetings, essentially gatherings of irate, wealthy individuals conspiring in her living room, the sound of their agitated voices carrying across the water like the lamentations of expensive phantoms. Her economic pressure campaign became utterly pitiable. Priscilla leaned on every local business to deny me service, threatening to withdraw her real estate business if they catered to that dangerous veteran. She tried to persuade my bank to suspend my accounts, my insurance provider to cancel my policy, and even attempted to have my supermarket loyalty card revoked. The woman's desperation was so profound, she was trying to weaponize grocery store rewards programs. But then Priscilla veered into truly hazardous actions. She began telling anyone who would listen that I intended to sabotage the imprisoned boats, asserting she had seen me near the marina at night carrying explosive devices. It was complete madness, but it resulted in sheriff's deputies visiting my home for wellness checks. The officers seemed mortified to be there, especially when I offered them coffee and presented my perfectly valid construction permits. While Priscilla was busy eroding what was left of her own mental stability, I discovered something that sent a chill down my spine. Mrs. Bennett's late-night observations revealed that Priscilla had been meeting with known marina troublemakers, apparently to discuss ways to damage my fence and attribute it to equipment failure. She was orchestrating actual sabotage while accusing me of the very same thing. The woman had completely detached from reality. That's when I made the most critical phone call of the entire conflict. "Rebecca, it's Jake. I need your cameras rolling tomorrow night. Priscilla is about to do something that will put her in federal custody, and I want it all on record." The reporter's voice crackled with an excitement usually reserved for major holidays. She had been anticipating this story's escalation for months. Dr. Martinez's environmental probe had grown into a federal investigation that would make Priscilla's other issues seem trivial. Water contamination levels were approaching those of a Superfund site, and my evidence of unreported spills had initiated EPA criminal inquiries. The yacht club's careless pollution was no longer just a community nuisance. It was an environmental crime with potential prison time. The situation was about to reach its breaking point. Marina management offered me a 50-50 partnership just to stave off bankruptcy from customer refunds. Several yacht owners were discreetly arranging for crane services to extract their boats by land, abandoning the marina altogether rather than enduring Priscilla's standoff. The smart money was evacuating faster than rats from a sinking ship. But the most gratifying turn of events was witnessing Priscilla's world crumble in real time. Her husband, Bruce, had moved out and filed for separation, citing irreconcilable differences and public humiliation. Her real estate license was under state review for ethics violations. Even her closest HOA supporters were booking impromptu trips to distance themselves from her increasingly erratic conduct. The scent of her desperation was more potent than diesel fumes on a still day. Mrs. Bennet saw her roaming the marina's edge at 3 a.m., muttering to herself and occasionally yelling at the trapped boats as if they were the cause of her ruin. The once perfectly composed HOA president had transformed into the neighborhood's eccentric figure in under 6 months. Media coverage had surged beyond anything I had foreseen. Marina Wars was being featured by regional news outlets as a case study for HOA reform movements statewide. Television crews were stationed nearby, interviewing everyone from yacht owners to environmentalists. Priscilla's attempts to control the narrative were failing spectacularly as more of her victims came forward with their stories. The financial drain was quickening. Legal expenses were depleting HOA funds faster than a hole in a ship's hull. Yacht club members were now liable for thousands in storage fees for boats they couldn't use. Marina management was losing vast sums on refunds and damage to their reputation. Everyone was losing money except for me, and I was sitting on property rights valued in the millions. Town officials finally set a date for the emergency meeting everyone had been clamoring for, promising live television broadcasts and public comment sessions. The community center was already overbooked, with an overflow crowd anticipated. This was Priscilla's final opportunity to salvage anything from the ruins of her domain. But I had one last revelation in store for her. David Bennett had gathered evidence showing that the HOA's insurance policy was invalid due to fraudulent property declarations, which meant every yacht owner could now sue her personally for damages. When this information was revealed during the public meeting, Priscilla's last vestiges of support would vanish like mist in the sun. The taste of salt air mingled with the sweet flavor of impending justice as I watched the sunset cast a golden glow on the captive yachts. The next night, Priscilla Weatherford would at last confront the community she had oppressed for years, and this time, she wouldn't be the one holding the microphone. The community center was filled to capacity when I arrived that Thursday evening. The air was thick with the scent of nervous anticipation and stale coffee, mixed with the palpable tension of a crowd eager for a resolution. 3 television crews had set up along the back wall, their cameras following every move like predators stalking their target. County Commissioner Williams was seated in the front row, looking as if he would prefer to be anywhere else, while Sheriff's Deputy Martinez stood near the entrance with the tired look of someone anticipating a disturbance. I came in with David Bennett, whose briefcase audibly carried the weight of 15 years of evidence, and Dr. Martinez, who held environmental reports thick enough to be a book. The nervous murmur of the crowd subsided into complete silence as we sat down directly in Priscilla's view. Her meticulously applied makeup could not conceal that her hands were shaking uncontrollably. Priscilla began with the most dramatic performance of her career, clutching the podium as if it were her only support. "We are gathered tonight because one selfish person has chosen to disrupt our tranquil community," she started, her voice filled with the feigned authority of someone trying to convince herself she was still in command. "Mr. Thornfield came to our neighborhood and immediately started to undermine everything we have established with baseless lawsuits and destruction of property." She depicted me as an unstable interloper holding the community for ransom, asserting that my fence would lead to the marina's bankruptcy and plummeting property values. "This man's supposed property claims are utter fabrications intended to misappropriate community assets," she proclaimed, gesturing toward me as if I were a known fugitive. The desperation in her voice was so thick you could feel it. That's when she made the fatal error that would bring it all to an end. "The marina has been lawfully managed by this HOA for 15 years, and we will not be coerced by counterfeit documents from some disgruntled veteran who cannot adapt to civilian life." The room fell silent. Even the whir of the television cameras seemed to cease. It was time for the decisive moment I had been planning for months. I rose to my feet slowly, allowing the silence to hang in the air until heartbeats were audible. "Priscilla, I'd like to thank you for that introduction, because now everyone is about to see exactly who has been deceiving this community for 15 years. David passed me the briefcase, and I extracted the underwater property surveys like a magician performing his signature illusion. These documents confirm that I am the owner of the submerged parcels that control access to the marina. For 15 years, you have been collecting rent on property you did not own, embezzling over $3 million from this community. A collective gasp filled the room like air rushing from a deflating balloon. Yacht Club members began to whisper urgently among themselves, while Priscilla's face transitioned from perfectly composed to ashen. But I was far from finished. Dr. Martinez, would you please present your environmental data? The scientist stood, holding reports that made standard EPA infractions seem like minor offenses. 15 years of illicit fuel discharges, unreported pollution, and water contamination that creates health hazards for every family in this community, she declared with the conviction of someone who had meticulously documented every transgression. The room erupted as if a grenade had been detonated. Yacht owners shouted their refutations while longtime residents pressed for information about health risks. Commissioner Williams tried to restore calm, but his expression revealed he understood this had escalated into a federal matter that would require extensive damage control. But my most satisfying revelation was yet to come. The best part, Priscilla, is that your HOA insurance is now void because of fraudulent property claims. Every yacht owner is now free to sue you personally, without any liability protection. At that moment, Priscilla completely broke down. She began to shriek about being victimized and a victim of a conspiracy, insisting I had faked everything and paid off officials. This is all a fabrication from a dangerous, unstable veteran. I have been shielding this community from his threats for months. You are all being deceived by a mentally disturbed criminal. The crowd turned on her like a pack of wolves sensing weakness. Mrs. Bennett rose with her substantial folder of documented injustices, reading out violation after violation as other residents added their voices to the chorus, finally sharing their own stories. Years of pent-up frustration erupted as one account of harassment after another was told under the intense scrutiny of the television lights. Sheriff's Deputy Martinez moved forward as Priscilla's tirades grew more and more irrational. "Ma'am, I suggest you compose yourself," he said. But she was past the point of reason, screaming about conspiracies and veteran terrorists until her voice gave out. "Here is my proposition," I announced once the turmoil had subsided, my voice carrying across the now silent room like a closing statement. A community-managed marina with equitable access for all, an environmental cleanup funded by those responsible for the damage, and transparent HOA governance that benefits the residents instead of enriching the board. The applause was deafening. Priscilla fled the room, shouting about lawsuits and persecution, but everyone now knew the truth. Her 15-year reign of oppression was finished, broadcast live for the entire county to see. The aftermath was like observing a structure of cards fall in slow motion, except each descending card represented pure justice. Within 48 hours of Priscilla's televised public breakdown, she stepped down from the HOA board in shame, while the marina management company practically groveled at my doorstep, pleading for new lease arrangements. The yacht club consented to finance a comprehensive environmental restoration to avoid federal charges. And all of a sudden, everyone wanted to be my closest friend. The change occurred with astonishing quickness. We reopened the marina with true community access for the first time in 15 years. The sound of families enjoying themselves replaced the entitled grievances of yacht club members. Children were learning to fish from the public pier, weekend adventurers were launching kayaks, and elderly couples were taking sunset cruises they could now afford. The water buzzed with the community vitality my uncle had always hoped for. Mrs. Bennett's overwhelming victory in the HOA presidential election ushered in a level of transparency that would have brought tears to the eyes of government accountability groups. Her first official action was to establish open-book financial practices and resident oversight committees, making future misconduct nearly impossible. The silent witnesses became community protectors, guaranteeing that no future despot could intimidate their neighbors. The atmosphere of fear that had pervaded neighborhood meetings was replaced by the refreshing scent of genuine democracy. My boat, the rusty anchor, became the unofficial symbol of our movement. Children would wave from the shore as I set out on the sunrise fishing excursions that initiated this entire saga. The marina was alive with activity from early morning until late evening. Teenagers were learning to sail, families were teaching their children to water ski, and fishing guides were bringing in tourist revenue that benefited the entire community, not just the yacht club members. The cacophony of diverse voices and authentic laughter had supplanted Priscilla's oppressive silence. The legal fallout was immensely gratifying. Priscilla's real estate license was permanently taken away after investigators found years of ethical breaches and discriminatory behavior. Her divorce became a source of local gossip, with Bruce citing public humiliation and financial irresponsibility in his court documents. She left the state like a fugitive on the run, last heard of attempting to start over in some unsuspecting community unaware of her past. Dr. Martinez's environmental project turned into a federal triumph, drawing university collaborations and government grants that converted our polluted marina into a showcase ecosystem. Fish species that hadn't been sighted in years returned, water quality improved significantly, and the entire area became a dynamic center for coastal renewal. The EPA now points to our recovery as a prime example of how communities can undo years of corporate environmental neglect. However, the most profound change was on a personal level. The Thornfield Maritime Heritage Scholarship now supports the education of Coast Guard families, funded by Marina income that once vanished into yacht club coffers. Our yearly community Marina Festival commemorates the victory over corruption and pays tribute to the waterfront customs my uncle fought to preserve. Every scholarship winner, every family taking advantage of affordable marina access, and every child learning to fish from our public pier continues his legacy of prioritizing community over personal gain. Property values surged once we did away with the artificial yacht club limitations, demonstrating that community access generates more prosperity than contrived exclusivity. Young families moved in, drawn by the affordable marina and transparent leadership. The neighborhood shifted from a secluded haven for affluent retirees to a vibrant community where working families could realize their waterfront aspirations. The impact extended well beyond our small marina. Our experience spurred HOA reform laws, property rights advocacy movements, and other communities across the state engaged in similar struggles against local tyrants. Former victims of Priscilla's intimidation returned as community leaders, and families that had been forced out by discriminatory practices came back to a neighborhood that now valued diversity instead of penalizing it. Every morning, as I sip coffee on my dock while the rusty anchor gently rocks in the water I fought to keep open, I am enveloped by the sounds of a community that is finally in the hands of its residents. Children fish where yacht owners once insisted on quiet. Neighbors assist one another instead of filing complaints, and the gentle lapping of waves no longer carries any sign of the corruption they once mirrored. The taste of salt air combined with victory is a flavor that never grows old, especially when it is enhanced by the understanding that bullies do not always prevail.